Imagine being 25 years into a marriage, a life you built, a future you were certain of, and then finding yourself at the edge of a choice you never thought you'd make, not because you stopped loving, but because your body had been trying to tell you something for years that your mind refused to accept. At some point or another, you've probably heard yourself asking, how do I trust myself when everything inside me is at war? How do I move forward when I can't even picture what's on the other side? My guest today, Heather Sloan, is a return guest, and she's back because she's been through one of the biggest life transitions there is, a divorce after a 25-year marriage she never saw coming. In the years that followed, she did deep inner work, trained as a spiritual director, and wrote a book about what she learned. Practical tools for trusting yourself, making hard decisions, and discovering who you become when the life you knew is no longer the life you're living. She's a nurse, a Peace Corps volunteer, an author, a coach. And she is proof that what feels like an ending can be the beginning of something you couldn't have imagined. Listen in.
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
Welcome, Heather, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you, Laura. It's so good to be here again with you. It's been a while.
We've done this before, so I will not start with the question I usually start with, and I will put the link to Heather's first podcast interview in the show notes. But Heather, as I discussed with you, this is a podcast geared towards women going through a life transition. And it's always important to hear stories of other women who've been through similar transitions and come out the other side. One of the reasons I invited you back. So please share with our listeners what transition you're coming out the other end of.
Thanks, Laura. Well, I have gone through the significant life situation of divorce after a very long-term marriage. I was married for 25 years and never saw that coming. Didn't think there was any, backdoor exit to this commitment. So it was just a big shocker to find myself in that happening with my relationship. So it was a big identity unraveling. So much of my ideas about what I wanted for my life. I mean, first of all, nobody goes into a marriage thinking that it's going to end. But unfortunately, so many of them do. I just didn't think it would be a choice I would ever make. And then when I did make that choice, the biggest, once I accepted that was the choice I was making and knew the reasons why I needed to make it, it was a big black hole of, well, who will I be now? Because so much of my identity was very much like that was just a core part of what I knew about myself and envisioned for the future forever after. So I didn't know I had no idea who I might be or discover I was on the other side of it. Mm-hmm. And so that was, it's so fantastic to be this far on the other side of it now. So easily remembering what that felt like in the beginning and for quite a while in the middle. It was such a huge lesson to remember. I can keep using these lessons I've learned from that situation to, as I keep evolving into and taking risks and moving into challenging circumstances, like just like I didn't know what was going to happen on the other side of that. And I've, lo and behold, like discovered this beautiful new life that I helped create, but also discovered that like that lesson I continue to go back to as I doing new things, like just becoming an author and learning how to do the marketing things related to have the entrepreneurial responsibilities to my book, like new things. Like I don't know how to do that. I don't know who I will be or how I will do that. I've just found that it's been one of the surprising lessons of that, going through that big identity shift, is it's such a valuable, experiential, embodied shift that I can continue to use in my life as I did that, so I can do this now. I can do this next hard thing. I don't know how, but I'm going to figure it out. So I think that was a very long-winded answer, but that's the shift of moving from being married at a very young age, 25-year marriage, and 2 beautiful children, to being in midlife, single, and empty nester. And it's just been there's been a lot of changes in the last 5 years. And so I'm just really mostly full of gratitude for who I've become and witnessing the many, many gifts that have been kind of wrapped in a dark package, but the unexpected gifts that have come about from that gigantic life change.
Wow. I love hearing about, what one wouldn't expect you to say, Heather, unexpected gifts. And I'm going to share before I ask you some of the questions that are coming up for me. I'm now enrolled in a coaching course called Holding Space. And today we spoke specifically about liminal space, which is exactly the space you found yourself in. I often think about sort of the trapeze, where whether you're forced to or you choose to let go of the trapeze, and you're going eventually to grab onto the next one. But there is this space that really requires a trust, and it's an inner trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question to you is, how did you develop that inner trust, which is necessary, I think, for you to look at me and say,
yeah, it's a really good and important question, because I think I discovered in the midst of the season where there was like a question mark around the relationship and where was it going. And, as my now ex, who initially said he didn't know if he wanted the marriage anymore. And that prompted a crisis of my own. And so there was a lot of liminal space, months turned into a couple of years where I lived with this question mark. And if you had asked me during that, do I trust myself? I realized, even though I would have had the impulse to be like, of course I do, I discovered that I didn't. What I finally came to was, it was slow, but I began to understand that if I trusted myself, what I would be doing was the thing that felt like it was impossible to do, which was leave the relationship. There was so much cognitive dissonance because I couldn't understand how that would be the right choice. Mm. It was like, there was part of me, the intellectual, it was like the mental, intellectual part of me was resisting everything that my body knew. It was like I began to understand I had been programmed from a lifetime, really. I understood in a big way why I was up against this, but the undoing of it required a learning curve of like, that's what really I was discovering is this, is like allowing myself to believe what my body knew and not override it. Like I was so, I mean, I don't think this is unique to like my particular circumstances. I felt like it was partly shaped. I grew up in, as a person of faith, raised in the particular flavor Protestant Christianity, all different denominations, but there was a way I've been a very spiritual person from a very young age. And I was coming to see that there was a big piece of, and was very intertwined with kind of the lens of faith, particular, whatever ways that I had sort of been steeped in. It felt more like covert than overtly taught. And I'm not assigning any insidiousness to it at all, but it was, I did feel as person of faith that there was this override of the body. We could talk about the body in its wisdom only so much as nutrition and fitness, but like one's intuition and all the other wisdom of the body, there was kind of messaging within the faith system of, kind of like, I don't want to get all into theological speak, but just overriding one's body wisdom and kind of grounded earthly knowing of being more like being a human being, like overriding that with spiritual, like long view, like hope on the horizon. This is not how the story ends. Like, can weather through suffering. There's a big piece in Protestantism around suffering and that being kind of a taught as not valued, but just like Jesus went through a lot of suffering. And, it's like role model of these important elements of the faith anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but I really came up against realizing how that cognitive dissonance of how much I was suffering emotionally. I was having all these physical symptoms with my heart and my GI system were just like in overdrive of not being able to calm down, like sort of that fight or flight, my body not well, and my spirit being like, we got this, gotta just keep going, gotta keep working on it, doing the emotional work with the counseling and the couples counseling and all my spiritual practices. Like I talk about this in one of the stories of my book, that it wasn't until I finally moved out of the home and into a place of my own, prompted by kind of a quick kind of situation of the circumstances. I was like, I'm done. I cannot do this how we're doing this right now. And I just need my own space. I became well with a particular issue that had plagued me for a couple of years overnight.
Wow.
And it was so instantaneously, the message I got was like, my body was like, finally, you're listening. Like my body knew what my mind and my spirit just wanted to refuse to believe would be the end of the story, so, long-winded answer again too. Trusting myself. I trusted God. I trusted divine. But I had to, I learned in a new way in this season to match the amount of trust I had in how the divine was with me and present and loving me through what I was going through. I learned to match that with a self-love and a self-trust that became, this image is so strong for me, like a dance, like dancing with the divine as an equal match partner to that, instead of it having be like, I leveled up. I feel like I leveled up in my own self capacity and taking responsibility, which again, I might have not really cognizantly felt like I wasn't taking responsibility, but there was a sense of victimhood and just not empowered in a way that was another important lesson, like kind of coupled with that self-trust of like taking full responsibility and ownership for everything in my circumstances. And that was there was a lot of self-growth, inner work happening while this exterior thing was the liminal space. Exterior, so many question marks. Does the relationship last? Where am I going to live? What does this mean for my children? What am I doing in life? Like, just so many outside questions I didn't have the answers to, which were terrifying. And, lots of fear around that. While I lived with all those outside question marks, what I was very much doing, it was the inner transformation. So that by the time I came closer to outside the other side of my divorce, I had changed so much. I had metamorphed on the inside, where I was ready to hit the ground running. As soon as I finally did get that, finalization of the divorce, which just took a really long time, I was so long ready, poised, because of all that work I had been doing amidst at least the first initial liminal years. So it is a work.
Yeah.
And it is very personal what someone brings to the table when one begins to go through a big liminal shift. It does bring up one's weaknesses that one might not even have realized one has. Like it life gives one opportunity, I think. And that's an example of the dark gift, right? Like I can't imagine myself being back, like that it took this in my life to grow like I did. Honestly, I just feel so much gratitude. I could not have had any imagination that I could even say that, rewind 4 years ago. I'd want to punch myself in the face. like there's nothing about this that feels good, but I think that's, again, it was just such a powerful life season of metamorphosis, really, that I don't ever want to forget how, the lessons that I learned in it. And that's honestly I wrote this book.
So I heard you reference a book, and I'm going to read out loud as Heather's holding it up. Make a tour de force of your divorce. Experience emerge from the split with grace and grit. So, Heather, what had you writing a book?
Yeah, so that when I got a bit out on the other side of my divorce, I've been a lifelong journaler. It's one of the ways I just process information, and have had a long-standing practice of getting up in the morning, a cup of coffee, and sit quietly with some kind of text or just my thoughts, and I work stuff out on a page. And so obviously I'd been doing that also during my divorce. And I felt like on the other side of it, I just felt like this was like the material that I had from all these lessons and things that all the big pivotal shifts I had ahas and awakenings. I just felt like, is this something for someone else? Like, could this be of service to somebody else? And I realized I needed help to look at that question. I didn't feel I had just a lot of material, but I needed some help looking at it. And so as things do, a resource came into my inbox right about the time I was asking myself this question of like, if this is a book, I need help understanding, whether it's a book or not, I don't really care, but I felt like it was in my way. I felt incomplete to not answer that question with some outside help. So I hired some help and got in this group, and it pretty quickly gathered momentum that with feedback that you have something here. And a year and a half later, my book is published. So it's a navigational self-help book, has some personal stories, but they illustrate these various different important points and pieces that one commonly will experience going through divorce. Just the framework is, I start with trusting your higher power, whatever that means to you, trusting yourself, and then discernment skills is kind of where I begin. And then it moves into different topics of healing and forgiveness and miracles and mindset shifts, boundaries. And each chapter, they're short chapters, each chapter has a toolkit with questions and practices that help one, kind of pick and choose what speaks to you. And, but it's meant to kind of build on itself, that by the time, if you really work through this book and taking the pieces that are relevant to you, the idea is, as happened to me, you will be transforming from the inside out, poised and ready to begin thriving before, for sure, after your divorce is over, but even before, like these inner tools that nobody can take away from you. And once you incorporate them and integrate them into your life, and learn what serves you, you can use those forever after for anything and everything on a day-to-day basis. So in that way, the toolkit and the practices are universally relevant, but they're couched in my book under this framework of using them as you're experiencing a loss of a very significant relationship.
You are not the sum of your earnings. You are the sum of your yearnings. If you're ready to use wealth to create more freedom and flexibility, let's align your finances with what matters most. Together, we'll build a plan that balances your scarce resources of energy, time, and money so you move forward with clarity, confidence, and less stress towards a life of true abundance. Learn more at www.trueabundanceadvisors.com and schedule a short conversation. So many questions come up for me. One of them is, you described at the beginning, before you go into more specific practices, which I'm also going to ask you about, but discernment skills. Can I'm thinking about how you described embodiment and really learning to listen to your body. But how would you define discernment skills? What exactly are you discerning, and any example?
Yeah. To back up just a step, I'm trained as a spiritual director, and there's different schools of across the country that provide this particular training. Mine was informed by Ignatian spirituality. It's from the Catholic tradition. Saint Ignatius of Loyola lived a few hundred centuries ago, and I just found it a very helpful framework system that is not the only way, the only lens that one can do this. But so he talks about consolation and desolation and desire. All desires are not equal, but desire is such a clue to our true selves. Like, desire is planted in us by the divine. And there's a reason why we have the desires that we have. But learning to discern amongst all the many desires we might have, which pulls us stepping towards our true selves, and what desires might, if followed out, might pull us away from our true self. So kind of this language of true self and false self, authentic self. And the true self is one that experiences freedom, and like these feelings of consolation can be thought of as expansion, and desolation as contraction. So the feelings of, if I pursue this desire, if I look at the beginning, the middle, and the end of it, can be an important question when analyzing one's desires. Like, maybe in the beginning, this feels like a really juicy, exciting desire to pursue. And then if I play that out, what's happening in the middle of, I've taken the step towards this desire. I'm experiencing, enjoying this desire. But then what's the end result? Maybe the end result is actually destructive. That's a simplified way of looking at desire. Or if a desire, maybe in the beginning, feels hard. So I'll say, example is an extreme example, and I'll just apply what I'm saying. I felt in my liminal space that I knew I was so uncomfortable with how things were, but the choice to leave the marriage felt like death, felt terrible. But if I stuck with that, the longer I was kind of looking at my life, I could see that the long-term outcome, even though it was a question mark, it had the chance to lead to life in a way that if I stayed, as I was analyzing my situations, if I stayed in the relationship, I was dying inside. And if I stayed in it, the end result would be, I'm giving up on myself. Like, this assuming nothing's changing. I'm accepting it fully just as it is. The consequences long term of that became very clear to me that that's unacceptable. I can't, this is the choice I have. One initially feels like death and terrible because I don't understand the question mark on the other side of it. But this one, I do understand what's on the other side if I stay, so in that way, that's, discerning the particularities of my situation, knowing myself, and what's the long-term consequences of either of these decisions, like discerning which one leads to life and expansion and which one leads to contraction and all kinds of other negative sort of feelings. So that's a framework of discernment skills that I set out in a simple way. You can go really deep, and there's so much to say about this particular framework, and there's books written about it, but I lay that one out early on in a accessible way for the reader to not have to know all the background story about where this comes from, but it's very practical. So it's St. Ignatius Loyola, he was, I gravitated to his teachings right away when I saw what he was basically doing so many years ago was paying attention to his emotions. Wow. And how he felt in this and he started analyzing it in this very scientific kind of way before the revolution of that kind of thought entered like the major cultural landscape. He was doing that with his own heart, and he was doing it about these two different choices he was making when he was had been a soldier in the army, and then he got injured, and he was convalescing for like a whole year. So he was playing this game with like what he's going to do with his future, and it kind of turned into a system that other people were like, what are you doing? And how did you do that? Like people started coming to him and wanted to learn from him. And then that developed the Jesuit order that, still is around. So anyway, I found it really helpful. Like, where's this really old decision-making discernment tool in a stream of faith that it's in the Catholic stream? And I was like, how have I lived this many decades as a person of faith and nobody told me about this? Like, I was kind of pissed. Like, I'm like, this is like some big secret treasure chest I just found for like decision-making skills, which just feels so core to being important in everyday life. So yeah, I like St. Ignatius.
So it makes me, of course, want to read about this. As you said, it can, though it's specifically for people undergoing divorce, so many of us in general have faced transitions in our lives where it sounds like these practices can be helpful. Heather, can you name another practice? Because this is a discernment, sounds like it's for decision making. And then you said that the book is practical and does go through practices that can help you. So is there any that comes to mind that you'd like to share?
This was a really big aha moment. I have a chapter on boundaries in here. And I had this aha moment listening to a podcast by Brene Brown, who was getting interviewed. And I'll say it succinctly, as she has acronyms for her things. She tells the story, which I won't go into, but she had made a hypothesis about metadata that she had collected on another research project, and she wanted to look at this metadata more and like do a more specific follow-up research study because she thought it was going to tell her something about what do the most compassionate people have in common. And she hypothesized that it would be there's some kind of spiritual faith. They have a faith background or something. And I was listening and I'm like, yeah, I agree with her. Like would be my guess too. And then fast forward, that shocker outcome she was surprised by. And when I was listening, I kind of was like, whoa, pause, rewind. Like I listened to that again, because the thing that showed up to be the most compassionate people have in common is really strong boundaries.
That's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. It was one of those things that I started to, it just, like you suddenly see things in a way you're like, wait, I don't understand. I have to now apply this lens on my circumstances so I can integrate is this true? Do I agree with this? How does this apply to my circumstances? Can I see the evidence of this? And, I, for sure realized like I was, operating in my relationship in a way that I had the intention and internal, thinking that what I wanted to be was, loving and a compassionate person in this very difficult circumstance with my spouse of trying to figure out what's going to happen in our relationship and all of the dynamics that were going on. But so the acronym that Renee lands with is BIG. What boundaries do I need to have to stay in my integrity so I can have the most generosity towards you? And so it begins with to be generous, to be compassionate in my relationships. It kind of goes back to some of that spiritual unwinding I had to do of I didn't feel like I was a doormat, but I definitely had some kind of operational thing happening of where I was self-sacrificing, valuing self-sacrifice ahead of, without really realizing it, my own personal integrity. And that was causing me to be very ungenerous because actually it led to resentment and other negative things that were the opposite of being a loving person. So it woke me up to ways that I needed to begin with me. And that wasn't selfish. That actually ultimately allowed me to be the most generous person in the relationship, even if it meant the relationship has to end.
Wow, that's pretty profound.
It rearranged things, but so I share that, and in this chapter, I ask some questions about, if you look at your life through this lens, like what do you notice about how you're loving yourself and how you're able or unable to love other people? And do boundaries have something to do with that? Is there, do you feel an invitation for, some place that's maybe frictional? Like, would that be something that might help you move in a way that feels more at ease, even if it's difficult? You feel, to feel within integrity within yourself, it makes everything easier, even if it's hard. I think when we live and we're not in our own integrity, everything is just off. And it just helped. That simple framework helped me a lot in that situation, but it, continues to be relevant. And then I guess another practice in the same, I call it the day examine, which has different labels in spiritual practices, but beginning and ending one's day with this sort of practice is something to try. If you begin in quiet and gratitude, think back over the day you just lived, if this is in the evening, or in the morning, the day you lived the day before, and call to mind moments for which you're grateful. So kind of just do a scan of the last 12 hours, 24 hours. And then invite in divine and ask for what you desire. And could be, like when you're thinking about, given the day you just lived and the day you have coming up, like what do you want? What do you desire? And asking for it. And then reviewing also in your review of the day, looking for moments of consolation and desolation, of where you felt contracted and or where you felt expanded, just noticing and using that. I mean, it's attuning yourself to greater internal awareness, which then informs you to live the day ahead based on what you're learning about yourself. And where is desire? What it helps me feel expansive? Where do I feel contracted? What is that about? Just being curious about what's going on inside oneself. And then if there's any moments that come up in your review of your day that you feel like were amiss in some way, like, oh, I had an opportunity to say that or to not say that. And, like the things that kind of leave us to feel a little unsettled, just to look for those, whether that's with yourself or with the outside world, and forgive yourself. Or maybe it calls for, asking for some outside forgiveness, but, like having that piece of reviewing misses, to just, help clean things up in one's life. Could be, so it's all just learning. And then closing with looking ahead to the day and asking divine to help you in your co-creative endeavors together. Like, okay, God, let's go. Or whatever your words are for higher power.
It could be
set an intention. Set an intention.
Inner wisdom for some of us who might be less comfortable with higher power.
Yeah. Yes. If anything is not helpful, just forget about it that I'm saying and substitute it with what, is meaningful for you. So that is this kind of a simple daily practice. It only takes 5 minutes to do, but over time, building that kind of practice, one gains so much inner wisdom about oneself and how one's life is guided. Really, when you start paying attention to that consolation and desolation on a daily basis, you're like, wow, my life is filled with clues about who I am and why I'm here and what I'm meant to do, because these things give me life. And for whatever reason, these things don't. And no judgment on that, but I find that's really exciting and helpful. And of all the possibilities out there, it gives me some focus of where to channel my energy and my time, and to be enjoying my life to the maximum fullest potential that I possibly can, because why else are we here? So I love these, I love and I'm grateful for these various practices that have helped me feel like it illuminates and simplifies too. Like life can get so complicated, and there is so much self-help out there. But to have some core, whatever they are for you, for one, to find some core tools that serve you, at least for a season. I found, certain things appeal to me for a while, and then I maybe shifted up, and maybe I circle back around, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll pick that up again. Or I tried that, and that wasn't really working for me for, then, but that can be guided by what I feel, what one feels drawn to. I think we're drawn to things at certain times for certain reasons.
Yeah.
And my life is a string of the right resource coming in at the right time. And just as I felt kind of complete with that, then a new thing would come in. So, that kind of reinforces the trusting the universe or divine wisdom to supply what I need. I'm looking for it. I'm open. I'm receptive. I'm receiving it, paying attention. I can't force and make everything happen. It's that dance again. I feel like this is what I need. And staying open to how that might come in, even in surprising ways, but trusting it always does.
I love that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm hearing, Heather, amongst this, at least one of the practices you shared, is that the consolation desolation, in that I think we humans are wired to notice the desolation. And if there's any consolation, any positive things, we don't focus that much energy on them. We're just, wired our reptilian brain to recognize danger, what's not right, to recognize what's disappointing us. And it's important to spend time on noticing what's giving us joy. And sometimes it's not even, we're culturally programmed to believe like that's not important, or that's not something one should pursue. And I love how you're noting both pay attention to it, pay attention to what we might want to do less of, pay attention to what we might want to do more of, and that it's okay to choose to follow pathways of joy. Mm-hmm. So as we come to the end of our conversation, what would you want to make sure that you share, especially for our listeners who may themselves be going through a dark period of a divorce or other big life transition they wouldn't have chosen?
Yeah. Well, for that person, if you're in it, I'm sorry, because I know it's hard. And also, congratulations, which doesn't seem like maybe the thing to say, but I know, and I hold out a torch of hope for you, just like so many of my beloved friends and dear ones did for me when I couldn't believe it for myself, that there is a beautiful life waiting for you on the other side. And it's okay if you have no imagination for that right now. Just try as you can to at least hold on to the hope that other people hold out for you, for that to be so, because it is coming. Just keep looking for the lights you can see and take the next step, and don't settle for getting stuck or telling yourself you're stuck.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being my guest. I will definitely have a link to your book in the show notes, as well as to your business website.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a PDF up on my website. It's, if you're thinking that divorce might be something that's going to be happening, or that you're just beginning, I have a checklist of helpful things. It's free there on my website. And I also newly have, if you have a friend going through divorce and you would like to give them a special gift, I have a kit I've put together that has my book and journal, a candle, chocolates, a special note. So it can be, might be the perfect thing to send to your friend. But yeah, show up. If you know someone going through divorce, the most important thing is your presence and checking in on them. It matters.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Thanks, Laura. Great to be with you today.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.trueabundanceadvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer, please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.